Hey there everyone, some exciting news. Our first campaign on that old world map that we produced is now finally ready. It's called Scumbogg's Vision, and there will be a lot more details added to this video, but if you're eager to check it out, it is immediately available, at least the first few episodes are. You can check those out by going to YouTube, sticking around on MiniWarGaming, or just going to the link in the description down below. Those are all viable options, but otherwise, why don't we go actually take a look at the map and get into the nitty-gritty of it. Ta-da! Now, if you've seen the previous video where Matthew was showcasing this map and giving you the finer details of it, I'd like to remind you all that these tiles are designed by Hexton Hills. We printed them here at MiniWarGaming at a much smaller scale to make a much larger kind of content in here. And this is all painted by a very talented individual, Adam from Green Leaf Terrain, who makes a good chunk of our terrain in-house as well. Now the map expands further beyond this point, but we're just focusing on Bretonnia and some parts of the Empire as we try and tell this story here. The idea is that we're going to start simple, small, and test out small mechanics and tell many different stories on this larger map. And as we get comfortable with the mechanics, I can start adding more and more layers to it and do more and more campaigns if they're successful. And eventually the goal is to have kind of a larger comprehensive rule set to try to emulate something like Total War Warhammer, or just a large map campaign with kind of complex rules. You're trying to manage settlements and manage upkeeps and armies and resources and building buildings, but that is not yet. Today, we simply focus on how armies move and how they might acquire artifacts or get to points of interest, how they replenish, and how they upkeep their armies. And if you guys wanted to try to do something like this at home, you can kind of pick and choose what elements of the rules you like yourselves and use them or don't use them, or expand upon them. I'm just kind of going with what I think we might like in-house and what you guys might like to watch without being too complicated. Now, just because we're playing in like Bretonnia and the Empire, and a little bit of like Athelloren down the Rathalor and however you want to pronounce it, we're going to be incorporating a lot more factions than just the ones you typically see there. I got ways to make it work for our guests to show up and play the armies they want to play, and then obviously we want to give variety in the campaign as well. It's not just going to be Bretonnia, Orcs, and Empire. There's definitely going to be Beastmen, there's definitely going to be Wood Elves. We'll find ways to get Skaven and Elves in there, or other types of Elves in there as well. Essentially, it's no different than any excuse you'd make up in the past for any of the battles you would have had with your friends that might not have geographically made sense. And before I get too deep into this intro video, I do want to let you know that at the end of this intro video is the actual start of this campaign. And we start moving the pieces around and determine where our first combat's going to be. So if you get tired of listening to me talk, just skip to the end of the video or towards the end, and then that'll kind of start off the whole campaign for you guys. Now, talking about guests, I should note that you don't actually have to play in this campaign map if you don't want to. If you just want to come by and play a standard game of the old world with any of us here at MiniWarGaming, that is still an option. This was mostly designed to be an in-house campaign, just to get a narrative campaign out there for the old world and see how we like it. But if you are interested in playing in it, well, we can figure that out as well. It's all doable. I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this first campaign is called Scumbog's Vision. It focuses on the current war going on in Bretonnia here. Massive orc forces invading the land. And narratively, the idea here is that Scumbogg, who is actually represented by this army down here, has convinced, it was acting as an advisor. He's a very powerful Orc Shaman, acting as an advisor to the Orc War Boss, leading the entire event here. Name pending. I cannot quite remember what Steve came up with the name for the Orc War Boss, but you'll find out soon enough. And that there is an idol, or a legendary idol to Mork and or Gork in the area somewhere, and that they're sending out scouting factions to try to identify where this point of interest might be, or where this idol might be. And that's represented by these points of interest that scatter every campaign phase. Again, I'll go into further details about all the mechanical rules of the game when they're applicable. One important detail I don't want to forget to mention in this intro video, mechanically for the campaign map, is that no army, no character actually starts with a magic item. Other than the Orc War Boss, I thought it'd be fun to give him a magic item. I gave him the Dead Art armor. We'll see if we remember to use it. I just thought it'd be fitting to have him start with something, but no one else gets anything. All the points of interest are random, common, magical items that as you decide to commit to searching for it, we're going to randomize between all the common magical items and then just give it to the army. And then, like armies can lose their soldiers permanently, they can lose these magical items permanently, as many mundane items are lost on the battlefield when you are, knocked out or injured or slain. And that is true for magical items as well. So the other army that wins gets to roll to see if they capture it or find it in the mud or anything of the like. So they can trade hands, ideally a lot in the campaign, and either allow you to cascade into further victories or give the factions just enough they need to kind of push ahead and stake a claim towards victory. Now, these are all common magic items at first. I might incorporate army-specific ones, but it's going to be a little bit harder to remember if they trade hands, and it's also narratively hard to make that work. I could just make up common magic items that share qualities with army-specific magic items. That's always a possibility, though I haven't decided if I want to do that or not. But for now, they're all common. So magical standards, all your typical arcane items, enchanted items, weapons, and armor are going to be in this campaign. Excluding the one-use only ones, those are probably going to feel bad to find. So I'd rather, or maybe you can find an unlimited store of them, but you can only use them once a game. Haven't decided on that either, but that is the idea. And once enough of the artifacts are scouted out, of course, the forces of fantasy in Bretonnia and the Empire have caught wind of what's going on, and they're setting up their own scouting forces too, the counterintelligence in the old world, I suppose. And they're trying to reach one of these artifacts before the orcs do, or at least simply stop the orcs from doing it. And they kind of like an asymmetrical win condition in this campaign. So in other words, this campaign is sort of tailored to allow me to stress test the current mechanics I have for armies moving around the board. Maybe they're too simple, maybe they're too complicated. I've already played a couple games and I like what I have so far, though I'm missing a few tokens to help me remember how certain things move. So there's already improvements to be made. But as we go along the way, I won't be changing much of the campaign. I'm not going to pull the rug out from underneath you and change things dramatically. I'm going to look towards the end of the campaign and the next one for adjustments. So all of your feedback is greatly appreciated. Back to one more element of the campaign, this idol of Mork / Gork that the shaman is trying to seek in this area would essentially like uplift the Wa to insane levels through all the spiritual energy of finding this artifact wood for all the orcs and amassing even more and more of them into this area, or at least giving the current forces there the final push to kind of conquer the land. And once they destroy all of their formidable opponents here, they can just kind of keep sweeping deeper into the Empire as well. So by that nature, the Empire is kind of forced to help out Bretonnia, because if they don't, then they're going to be left on their own. If you're curious to read the campaign rules ahead of time and just kind of getting a sense of what this campaign is going to be about, they are available on the MiniWarGaming website where all the campaign tools are, or we always make them public for free if anyone wants to adapt them into their own play groups or just kind of like mold them to their needs, essentially. It's a rough draft as well, so bear with me. And just kind of don't take it as hard rules as written. You can augment anything you like in it. It's just kind of what I threw together that I thought might be fun. And if I remember, I can put a link in the description down below to redirect you to where those rules might be found. Now, before we get to our first campaign phase, which will then eventually lead to our first battle report, I do want to go over some of the details as to why the orcs have so many armies on the board and why the Empire and Bretonnia don't. The orcs are under a massive Wa as they attack Bretonnia, and they're able to amass their numbers very quickly and hit their enemies very fast. Now, the Bretonnian feudal system, and then I'm not even too sure what kind of system the Empire would technically use as like different time periods in a way, take a little bit longer to amass their forces. And as we have them, they only have one standing army each compared to the 4 standing armies of the orcs. We have a massive Night Goblin army led by a Night Goblin warboss down here. There is a troll horde led by a troll hag. We have Scumbogg right here in the middle, who is our one and only level 4 wizard in this campaign as of right now. They are a rare resource in the old world. Even though you see them in every like standard battle report, narratively, they're hard to come by. And our orc war boss leading the entire Wa up here. And they are all full standing armies with relevant units that would complement their characters and leaders. You know, trolls in the troll army, Night Goblin in the Night army. The shaman and the war boss have like your more typical like orc armies. You got like big fighty orcs in both of them. Both units essentially. And then for our Bretonnian forces and our forces from the Empire, they have what they could muster. They're starting off as a tier 2 faction. I mean, I'm having them count as one faction overall as opposed to treating them separately, only because I thought that they might get a little, the mechanics I have for it might have them grow exponentially more than the orcs possibly could, and that just feels like it wouldn't work out nicely. And to represent that, they have a lot stricter force organizations. Now, they still have access to special and rare, but they have to bring more core. They can't bring as many character supports, and they can't bring as much special and rare. Now, that means that this campaign is going to be difficult for the Forces of Fantasy at first. Now, the orcs might have 4 standing armies, but logistically, that can kind of be a nightmare to reallocate reinforcements, and then, you know, maybe one's more greedy than the other, and as to where the orcs might amass. They have lower initiative on the campaign map, harder to move around. The Empire and the Bretonnia can move around a little bit faster. And over time, throughout this campaign and the campaign phases, the Empire and Bretonnia factions will be mustering more and more soldiers. So you're going to see them getting closer to a tier 3, to a tier 4 faction eventually. I just kind of want them to have a hard time initially, and then watch like the heroes rise and come up to the challenge. But in the very end, this might not be balanced at all. You do have the orcs starting off much more powerful than the Forces of Fantasy, and it is the dice game after all. So if it goes poorly for them, well, it goes poorly for them. But hopefully they're able to rise to the challenge. Now, on top of that, the other main mechanic I have here on the map is the scattered points of interest. So I have a main scatter point around here where I always want 10 points of interest on the map. These are the colorful tokens you see spread around the battlefield. Now, I have one of the mechanics in the game be that when these points of interest randomly spawn and scatter from this point, there's a chance that they spawn with a roving army, which is counting as like a neutral army. This gives possibilities for guests to come in, play these armies, or they could just pop up as the guest army. And obviously it gives variety in the campaign as well, because right immediately we have wood elves, we have beastmen, and who knows what other dangers might be lurking in the mountains or at any of the other points of interest on this map. Now, these neutral armies do get to move as well, and I'm going to be keeping track of their injuries and losses and replenishment, but we're not going to focus on that one as much. I'll be doing those ones kind of off camera and not really going over what they gain and what they lose. But it is important, I think, to keep track of them, so we have them here on the map, and they get to move after all of the active player factions move. So after the orcs are done moving, after the Forces of Fantasy are done moving, then we'll move our neutral factions. They kind of just generally move towards the nearest enemy. That's what the beastmen like to do, whereas the wood elves more or less just kind of protect the woods. They don't leave the woods too much unless I feel like they need to for whatever reason. That's effectively it, everyone. We're ready to go into the first campaign phase of this. The Forces of Fantasy won initiative in the first campaign phase. I've already scattered all the points of interest, as you can see. We will determine what those magical items are when they are captured and taken, and we're ready to start this show. This Empire army here is going to be moving first. My guest today is Jacob, who is joining us, though I only really have a lot of room for me on this map. But if I had Jacob here, then it would just be covering all this up as well. Orders from the Empire to hold the pass in to their lands from Bretonnia to prevent this encroaching Night Goblin army, who is rumored to be ordered to essentially cause havoc at the borders of the Empire and try to waylay any armies that might try and break their way into Bretonnia to assist the Bretonnians out. So with that in mind, they get to do a move. Simply, you just move around. Each army has a control zone of 1 hex all around it. And if they enter an enemy's control zone or an enemy enters their control zone, a battle happens. Simple as that. Now, there's 3 ways you can move your armies. You march, where you get to move up to 4 hexes. Boop. Or sorry, it's 3 hexes, my bad. Or you can double time, where you get to move up to 6 hexes, but you reduce your control zone to 0. Like, enemy armies can just zip right past you if they need to, because you're either winded or exhausted, or you're just not set up and ready to take them on as they approach. And the last one is just set up an encampment. You double your control zone to 2 hexes all around you. You get bonuses to replenishment when that comes up at the start of campaign phases, or during the campaign phase. That's not in combat phase. We're already past that part though. And you can't move though. Like, that's it. You just kind of sit there and you defend an area. I don't know how much people are going to use that. Hopefully it comes up a lot, but we're going to keep it simple for this first one. They're simply going to just stay marching, and they are going to move their 3 hexes to the start of this pass right here. And they're gonna hope, and then I'm gonna flip them upside down. That way I can remember, and that we can remember that they've already activated for this campaign phase, and they are gonna be controlling those hexes around them. No, now it's a little risky move. This is where Jacob wanted to go, just to, you know, defend the Empire and start a narrative. Leading this force, we have a young general of the Empire. His name is Rupertus, and he is essentially leading what he could muster. And you'll see the army list when we get to combat. A little dangerous. We got the Beastmen nearby. They're kind of set up to attack them afterwards. And we kind of want to get to a combat right away, honestly. So the first move, and now we alternate, I should note, between the Orcs and the Goblins and the Forces of Fantasy. Now that we've moved this Empire army, we get to move one of the Orc armies. And instead of grabbing an artifact right away, we just want to get right to a fight. So what better army to start this off with than Night Goblins, leading some trolls. It's a big old Night Goblin horde, so they're going to march, boop, boop, boop. They're going to enter the control zone of the Empire here, and we're ready for our first battle report.